All right, everyone, welcome to this week's Mixing Mondays. As the title has suggested, it is about taking care of both ourselves and our gear. And as usual, no one claims here to be an expert on anything. It's just more fun talks around. Liam and I are just kind of the moderators for this, but everyone can chime in for whenever they want to on what we talk about. So I figure let's kind of just get right into it. And it's a wide topic, and we're going to admit we probably can't cover it, but just kind of mental health and more in our industry. Mental health in general is a huge topic, but just kind of the challenges of like our job in terms of, for once we don't talk about the technical, is like if you've had a bad day, your typical, you're an office worker or whatever, you get to go home, watch TV, have a beer, do whatever. But for us, like, and as someone who's local, but I'm sure for a tour, I'm sure like we've all had our bad day, and to know I can't go home. You have to get on the bus, get on the plane, or however you're getting to the next stop, and then got to do it all again the next day. So how does everyone deal with that stress of like, not just that situation, but like, how do you kind of keep sane during, your travels?
Anyone? No?
Well, let me just jump in and just introduce Rob to everybody, if that's okay. So Rob is joining us as a guest this week. He is the artist that I primarily work with. He's the artist that I tour with, and it is a mental health presentation. I think Scott saw a YouTube that I did with Rob and thought that it might be interesting to have Rob along for the conversation. Our presentation, Rob's presentation, is primarily aimed at high school kids, but we also talk to lots of adults, and that's come to light more and more in recent times. You don't stop having mental health problems when you turn 19 years old. And we're out there working on that, touring, except for now. So fortunately, we're also able to work on a record. I've been working on records with Rob for about 10 years, and that's how I came into it. And Rob had sent over an introductory YouTube, and I don't know if anybody's had a chance to have a look at that yet, but maybe we can just get started by giving Rob the opportunity to say hello.
You're muted, Rob.
I think you're muted, Rob. Rob, you're muted. Rob, you're muted.
There, I'll sound a lot better now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Audio is not my thing, you know that, right? No, for me, I never really wanted to be a musician, but if you saw my story online there, when I was 17, I was in a car accident when I was actually found dead on arrival with no pulse, not breathing, and obviously I was resuscitated, brought back to life. They had to rebuild my skull with metal in my chest and shoulder. I woke up from a coma. I didn't know who I was or my parents or anything like that. So I went through a really dark period after that for about two and a half years. I was suicidal, didn't want to be alive, because I went from an athlete who was 6'5" getting scouted, and now here I was getting bathed by my mom, and my whole life was ripped away from me. And I made it through that dark time, but I wondered to myself how many people were like me that were, also having those dark thoughts and not talking about it. So I realized I wanted to tell my story just to let everybody know it's okay to talk about it when you have those dark thoughts, that you're not alone. So I started playing music, and we did our first album, and we thought we were great, but we sounded terrible. And it was at our fourth album, we got a record deal. That's when I met Steve, and we did an album together, and we had a few top 10 hits on the radio, and we were working on a record deal down in the States and all kinds of stuff, Japan and all this. All the world was being promised to us by our management at the time. And then I got offered a 9-month tour taking my guitar through prisons, youth detention centers, native reserves up north, and some schools, telling my story. So I actually ripped up my record deal, my publishing deal, my management deal, and I went on this tour. And I ended up writing songs together with people that I met on this tour, songs about addiction, about suicide. And then after that 9 months was over, people wanted to hear what these songs were about. So I started touring more. just me and my guitar sharing these stories. And then it started building, and then we started doing bigger venues. And then we would, as much as we say it's a presentation, it's our full-on rock concert where we are now, just before COVID, we were playing, we'd set up, let's say at the Jubilee Theater in Calgary that holds like 3,000-4,000 people. And we would do 3 days of shows there, or we'd go to a small arena and we'd perform. We would pay for all the school buses to come in. We'd fly in the kids from the reserves, and we'd put on these concerts. And then I'd meet with the students afterwards, the ones that were struggling, and actually had 917 students actually handed me their suicide notes at the end of our concerts. And then we'd go bring them over to counselors to get help and stuff. And a lot of them tattooed the lyrics of our songs on their arms where they used to cut. So I took all the signatures off all those suicide notes, and I tattooed those signatures from the bottom of the suicide notes on my arms, and just to show like, hey, yeah, I was there once too. And I'll add this to the fact I heard in the introduction there, you guys are talking about the fact that, when you're not touring, you're at home, or you can't just go home, but you're on the tour bus, and being on the road can be a difficult thing. But I'll even add in the fact that we toured with a lot of huge bands, and I truly believe that there's a connection between the arts and mental illness. Like whenever I meet somebody that tells me they have depression or anxiety or suicidal ideation, one of my first questions is, I'm like, so do you work in music production? Are you a singer? Are you a dancer? Do you paint, poetry? And everybody's like, yeah, how'd you know? And I think for those of us that love to express ourselves through music or art of some sort, we have this desire to express ourselves emotionally. And we live in a world where we're told to bottle up our emotions and not talk about it. So I think that's why we see so much issues with both mental illness, depression, suicide in Hollywood and in the industry, because we live in a world where we're not supposed to express ourselves. And we're some of the people that need to express ourselves the most. So that's kind of what we've been doing. So our last show was in Medicine Hat. We played to the arena there, and we walked off stage, and like the rest of you, we found out that the world ended and we couldn't play concerts anymore.
So here we are.
Yeah.
Here we are in a Zoom meeting talking about it. And thank you, Rob, for coming here and just telling your story. And it just brings up a good point. Like you said at the beginning of it, it's like, after you turn 19, your mental problems don't go away. In fact, in some ways, in another, they get even worse. Not comparing teenage to adult, but it's like it continues. And maybe, Rob, you could say, like, while you were doing these tours, I'm sure like those, and I watched that full video you and Steve did, that was about half an hour, but I'm wondering, like, whether it be during those tours, even before, like, how did you mentally, like, some people love being on the road. Like, I know people who are like, they hate being at home. Their home is the road. But for those of us who still have a home, like, how did you kind of keep it all together and not lose it while you're on tour, and knowing, like, whether it be every day a hotel room or the bus or whatever, like, how did you keep from going nuts?
Well, I think the biggest thing is, finding some people that you can open up to, like, because, whether you're on the road with a touring act or whatever you're doing, expecting that everybody's willing to have a deep conversation at the end of the day when you're having a bad day, that's tough to find. But if you can be real and actually talk about it when you're having a bad day, very quickly, I find that as soon as one person opens up, then all of a sudden you realize somebody else goes, oh, I'm glad you said that, man. I'm also kind of struggling. I miss being at home, or man, when I go home, things are rough because I miss that camaraderie when I'm on the road with boys, so again, if we keep it inside and we don't talk about it and you internalize everything, then you start to think you're cursed. You think you're the only one that's struggling in that moment. And I find it's always the case the moment you say, like, hey, anybody else having a tough day, or like, man, I'm just feeling down, like, and then be like, yeah, I'm glad you say that, man. I have some tough days too. It's like the first person that's willing to open up and have that conversation, all of a sudden it's like, dude, I'm glad you're saying that because I'm feeling the same way. Like the first time we were called to, and we'd been doing this tour for years actually. And our whole show was like, hey, man, this happened to me when I was 17. You know, I was found dead on arrival in a car accident. So make sure you make every day count. But then one day we got called to a school and they said, we just lost a kid to suicide. And on this girl's suicide note, it revealed that she had a pact with one of her friends. Like, if you kill yourself, I'll kill myself. And the teacher said, we don't know who it is. So we flew out to do a show for this school of 1,000 kids. And it was a weird feeling because I knew somebody in the audience was about to take their life and I didn't know who they were, where they were sitting. We were trying to draw that out of somebody, right? And then, so as I'm talking about it, I realized that day I needed to share that I had been there once too. And my own bandmates didn't know it. I had never opened up to anybody. But on stage, I'm thinking, shit, I got to share this, right? And I'm thinking, what are the teachers going to think of me? What are the students going to think of me? What's my own team going to think of me? I'm supposed to have my shit together, right? And then from stage, I go, hey, I know somebody here's thinking about this. You're not alone. I was there once too. And my whole band, like, what? And after the show, my boys were like, dude, we didn't know that. I'm like, yeah, well, I kept it inside. I didn't know what you guys were thinking of me, you know? And they're all like, no, I'm glad you said something, because my drummer all of a sudden opens up to me. And then everybody starts having these conversations, because just for that lone fact that I was willing to be vulnerable, you know, all of a sudden we're able to have these conversations. And quickly you'll find out who are the people that are like you that may have also had those thoughts too, or at least are willing to have that conversation with you when you're having a bad day. But step one is being willing to be vulnerable yourself. And then you find out that you can start to recognize this in other people. So when Steve called me and said, hey, you know, we have these sessions where we just get together and talk music and production. And, you know, they said, hey, they saw the video with you, Rob, and me and Steve talking, and said, hey, we want to do a thing on mental illness. Like, kudos on you for saying it and doing it. This is exactly what I'm talking. You're saying, so what do you do? How do you keep sane? Well, keeping sane is by letting the people around you that you're not always sane. Like, mental health is just like physical health. Like, some days physically you feel great, and some days physically you don't feel great, and you have a flu or you got a cold. Mental illness is the same thing. Everybody experiences mental illness in some form. Some it's more extreme than others. Some people go right to the suicidal thoughts. Some it's just depression. But everybody has good and bad days. So the fact that you guys are just sitting down and willing to do this means you're already taking the biggest and most difficult step. And that's just saying, hey, why don't we talk about this as buddies? Because I think it's difficult for everybody to express themselves, but especially as men, I think it's really difficult. And in this industry, I'm sure you guys see it. I think we only have one girl on this call with us here. You know, the industry is packed full of dudes, but and I'm not saying it's easier for girls to express themselves. Like, I think it's difficult for everybody. But the fact that you guys are opening up and within a forum of talking with each other, especially in the midst of COVID, where you got stresses of financially. You know, you're not just at school where you live with your parents. Now, if you're not working, you know, you're paying your own bills, not just, you know, getting meals paid for you by your parents and stuff like that. So this alone right here is a massive, huge step in just being vulnerable and saying, hey, let's have a talk about something. Like, one guy had me on his fishing show. He's got millions of views just fishing. And then he realized of all these closest buddies that he has that he goes fishing with, 4 of them have taken their lives in the last few years. And he goes, I have sat on fishing boats and spent dozens and dozens of hours with these guys. And I never once asked, hey, how are you guys doing mentally? Any of you guys struggling with anything? So he brought me on his fishing show, and we went fishing, talking about exactly this. It's like, hey, why don't we look out for each other? Why don't we express when we're having a bad day? So he did it in that form with his fishing buddies, and you guys are doing it here within audio production. So you've taken the biggest and most important step.
Yeah, and one of the steps on these topics too, we had mentioned a few weeks ago, we had done a talk on diversity where, trust me, this is going somewhere, of just that same thing of like, we need to just talk about it. We're not saying we're solving the problems. It's just like, let's talk. And we're also in an industry that, I can't speak for other people's experiences, but at least in the part of the world I am, it's still very dominated by this man macho, be like, shut up and just do it. Don't complain, just do the job. Well, and I'll admit fully here, I see a therapist bi-weekly, and to me, that's personally helped. And it always makes me wonder, I'm like, I wonder if like, if these tours, both from the technician side and from the artist side, like if they had a therapist on tour, I always wondered like, maybe, some people are going to be screwed up no matter what, but I'm like, would it still, it would make, I feel it would personally make a huge difference if there was someone on tour who was like a licensed clinical social worker or a therapist of someone, or even if the tour couldn't afford that, of just being like, hey, let's all agree to like, it doesn't have to be like an AA meeting where everyone talks together. It would just be like, let's agree to kind of just talk about this. I think I find people might be a little bit less assholes because we've all been to that show. We've all worked with that guy or gal that is just like, man, why are they such an asshole? And then someone always defends saying, oh no, that's this person. Or they'll be like, you should have seen the old person. I'm like, if they're an ass, they're an ass. Yes, we all have our bad days, but it's like, I don't know, like what are other people's thoughts on that? Just to toss that topic idea, be like, does anyone else think like maybe if that might actually benefit? It's always been an idea I thought, and I'm just curious what other people think.
I can jump in there. I just wanted to say that I totally resonated with what Rob was saying about how sometimes you don't like, everybody's pretending to be fine and everybody's pretending to be, making their way through and being strong and everything. And I've had so many conversations over the past couple months with friends, especially in the music industry, who are, putting up a happy face, and then you actually get in a one-on-one conversation. And I've had so many of those like, oh, I'm so glad that you said that you're having a hard time because I'm having a really hard time. And then we have such a good talk about it. And it just takes that one moment of, just being vulnerable, like Rob said. And it's been really interesting to have some of those chats, especially with people that are not working and don't know what to do with it. I think especially people that are so used to being so busy, you get used to having an out, you get used to having an escape. Like, and, even in the busiest times, I think I'm guilty of when things get a little bit dark or sad or whatever, it's like, well, I can just go to work and forget about it, and now we don't even have that. So it's all about finding new coping skills and new strategies. It's been a really interesting time. That's kind of off topic, Scott, but that's just what I was thinking about there.
Well, it is kind of on topic too, Kim, because there's like, I live with my mother, and she says like during this whole COVID thing, she's like, you've been a lot nicer to live with because like, think of how tired we get, how stressed out. Like, again, I can't say on tour, I'm a local IATSE person, but I have to drive often 1 to 2 hours to get to work, and often that's stupid hours. And we kind of alluded to this last week before my power decided to go out, is a lot of the hours we do, whether you're freelance or union, the hours we work are really stupid. Like, unless you've gotten really lucky with your tour, sometimes you got to get there at 8. So you then got to leave your house at like either 7 or 6, which means you got to wake up at like so early. And then, you do the work day. Even if you do things that can like reduce the time, like virtual sound check and stuff, you still have to then load the thing out. And especially on a decent sized tour, you're not out the door till midnight. And sometimes you got to be then to the place the next day. So yes, the busy work, but then when you have those moments, and I think as much as I also don't wish COVID existed, it's given us time to think and go and really think about ourselves. So no, Kim, I think you really brought up a good point. It's like, I forget who it was, and I'm not going to name drop anybody. Someone had mentioned during the Live Sound Summit, I think it was during Scott's presentation about the state, and someone was saying, it's like, yeah, before COVID, I would drink a lot. And now that we've had all this time where we're not working, I stopped drinking. And I was just interested in going, I'm like, how many more people now, because they're not just being overworked, has been realizing like, crap, I was having unhealthy habits. Like, and I'll admit a personal habit of mine, it was kind of out of necessity, and it's admittedly on the low spectrum. I would have to drink large amounts of Mountain Dew, caffeine, eat junk food because of that 2-hour drive. I didn't want to pass out and crash the car. So it was one of those, do I gain 5 pounds and make it home safely? But it was still, it's like, man, how many, I'm thinking like, how many other people have even worse, addictions or habits that they think in their head, I'm doing this just to make it through the day.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because one thing we say at our show is this, like when I had my car accident, I was hit by a semi truck, and then everybody came to me and said, everything happens for a reason, right? And now I had to lay there figuring out the reason this happened to me. And I got to the point where I finally realized, man, the reason it happened to me is because me and my buddies were going way too fast down an icy road in Manitoba. That's why it happened. We got hit by a semi-truck. So we always say that bad things don't happen for a reason, but bad things happen with potential. Like tragedy has the potential to tear apart an individual, a family, a community, a province, a country, but tragedy also has the potential to bring a person peace. It can bring a family together, a community together. So the fact that you're saying, whether it's your mom going, hey, I notice you're more pleasant to get around with, that's because you've made something positive out of this. Some people, because of COVID, it's like, if you're not careful, it could bring you the exact opposite. Like I was on a radio interview in Vancouver, and the DJ says this to me. He goes, well, Rob, it's a good thing you were hit by that semi, isn't it? I was like, no, it's not good to get hit by a semi. He goes, but look what you've done with it. Like, look at this tour. I said, but the semi didn't make me do this. He goes, well, when you're old enough, you'll figure it out. When you're more mature, this had to happen to you. He goes, for example, he goes, do you know Rick Hansen, the guy in the wheelchair, right? And he goes, I assume you guys are from Canada, but I shouldn't assume that, I guess. But in Canada, Rick Hansen is a legend because he's this guy in a wheelchair that's done just remarkable things. He's a legend. He goes, Rick Hansen says he's happy that he's in a wheelchair because of what he's been able to do with it. I said, well, that says a lot about Rick Hansen, not about wheelchairs. Not everyone in a wheelchair has done something positive with it. So in the midst of COVID, for one person, it could make you go down that junk food could be worse, and your alcoholism could get worse. You could drink more. But there's the potential you could during this time. I'm drinking less. I'm actually having a healthier diet, but it's all about the decisions that you make during the difficult times. What potential do you want to find in this tough moment, right? I've seen it happen. Like, divorce rates are through the roof because of COVID, because all of a sudden you realize, man, we don't get along very well when we're in the same house together,
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because as Scott was making his point, I was just thinking that I was the complete opposite. I used to drink quite heavily up until 3 years ago, January, I think. And since this lockdown, there's been a few times where it's been tempting to go to the shop and buy something to drink, which I haven't. But it's one of those things where, because there's that lack of structure, a lack of being part of something, and it's a totally different way of life, being primarily locked in my house for most of each day. Some of the people that I would normally talk to the most have actually been less affected by this in terms of work than I have, which has worked out quite poorly for me because they're busy while I'm not. So I'm kind of like you said, you've got to work out what you want to take from the situation, really. I find myself really, really frustrated if I have a day where I don't feel like I've done anything productive. Sometimes, I might be trying to do something productive, might be trying to learn something new, and it's not sinking in, and I get frustrated. And at that point, I kind of have to take myself away and do something. Like, I can't even go away and just sit and watch TV for a bit, because then it's this like vicious circle where I just feel like kicking myself for doing that. So I feel like I have to go away and just find something easier to do that's going to give me that productive kind of kick, and then come back to what I was doing in the first place. But it's interesting how it affects different people, whether it's harder for them to be, whether it is lockdown or whether it's just returning home from a tour and they're having time back at home. That different people find it more difficult to be on the road, and some people find it more difficult to come back home. And it'd be interesting to hear how different people cope with that. Do you find that it's more difficult, or people lean more one way or the other? Or is it more difficult for people to return to home or on the road? Or have you had any experience with this?
Is this for me specifically,
Sorry,
or everybody in the room?
For you, Rob. That was a bit of a rant where I left your name out of quite a lot of it.
No, and judging by your accent, I'm realizing I was making a bad assumption that everybody's in Canada.
Yeah, I think I'm the only UK member here, though.
Yeah. No, well, first of all, another big step, because you recognize like, wow, if I didn't do something productive today, that I realize, oh, this felt like an unproductive day, and you feel disconnected. Well, today didn't even matter. The fact that you recognize that, and you don't just want to sit in front of the TV again, you're already recognizing the mask that you put on, whether it's just staring at a TV, or it's the easiest mask to put on is drinking, because it's like, how do I cope with this disconnection I have right now? Or how do I cope with not being on the road? Or how do I, like, a lot of people don't look at those things. So yeah, I think people way sooner lean to the negative. For example, Steve and I are on our new album, we're working on a song called, it's called Overcome. Like, and if you ever ask somebody, describe a moment in your life when you've been overcome or you've been overwhelmed, 95% of the people are going to write, I felt overwhelmed when this happened. And you write a negative thing. But if you stop and think about it, why do we wrote the song, but why do we always jump to the negative? I'm overwhelmed when I failed at this and I did this wrong, or somebody said this to me. But you can be overcome or overwhelmed by somebody doing something positive to you or for you, right? It's like, so the second verse of the song is like, wait, I was overwhelmed when somebody took my hand during a tough day. I was overwhelmed when this. And for me, when I lay in that hospital room and I'm learning how to walk and talk again, I kept waiting for somebody to walk into that hospital room and say, like, Rob, I was hit by a semi like you. I have a metal skull like you do. I was an athlete that's now getting bathed by his mom. I was suicidal. I would have been like, oh, cool. Okay, great. What's the next step? Because I need a hero right now, right? And no one ever walked into my hospital room and did that for me. But my new motivation became, well, maybe nobody walked into my room and checked up on me, but maybe I could check up on somebody else, because that could become an addiction in itself, right? Like, I heard a comedian the other day, he said, I was watching Netflix the other day, and all of a sudden Netflix pops up and says, are you still watching? And he goes, that's the moment I realized the only person that has checked in on me is Netflix. Like, nobody else is called to say, hey, Rob, you doing okay, man? But it's Netflix that's going, hey, you've been sitting in front of that TV for 4 hours. Are you still there? Or did you just forget to turn this thing off, right? So checking in on each other. And if you don't have somebody checking in on you, that's what AA is all about, Narcotics Anonymous. You do get around and say, like, hey, I have some bad days. And you develop this thing where it's like, hey, if you are having a bad day, you can call me at 4:30 if you're getting tempted to do a line of cocaine. Call me at 4:30 in the morning. And there's this community that happens, So even within this, you guys have created a community where it's like, hey, we can bounce off ideas off of each other. But again, doing this, like at the end of this call today, if you guys say, hey, let's make this vow that let's check in on each other once in a while. Not just, I don't know if this is a weekly thing you guys do or a monthly thing, but if it is, it's like outside of the weekly thing, let's check in on each other. Even if it is via text or a quick phone call. Hey man, you popped up in my heart today. Like, we get those promptings sometimes and you don't realize, oh, maybe that person just came to my mind and I should reach out to them. Like for me, when I got through my darkest time, I was like, hey, that's it. I'm done living this dark life. I'm going to check in on other people. And I was like, I want to do something that matters. I thought I'd start feeling promptings to like move to Africa and build a well, right? The first prompting I felt was to phone the semi driver that hit me and tell him I was okay. Like, it was clear as day. You get those gut feelings, right? So I had phoned the police and I'm like, hey, can I get the phone number of the semi driver that killed me a little while ago, right? And the cops are like, no, you can't have his number. But I kept trying because I'm like, I think this guy needs to hear from me. And finally, a cop gave me his number and I phoned, and a big trucker from the US answers the phone. And I said, hey, man, remember that car accident up in Canada a few years ago? And he's like, yeah. And he got really quiet. I said, I just felt in my heart that I should call you and tell you I'm okay. Like, I survived. I made it. And this guy started bawling his eyes out. Found out he had not driven a vehicle since that day. He was seeing a therapist. He was on depression medication. The accident wasn't his fault. It was our fault. But he remembers running me over with a semi. He didn't know I came back to life. So we talked and he was set free. And then I hung up the phone. I was like, whoa, like I could tell that mattered to him, but that mattered to me. Like it felt good in that moment to do something for somebody else. So now anytime I get a prompting in my heart, you know, it's like, I got to do this. I don't know who put the call out, but hey, Steve, I watched that video. Can Rob join this call? That was listening to a little prompting, you know, like it's like something tells me we should have Rob on this call. And that's why when Steve called, hey, do you have an hour you could set aside to do this? I'm like, yeah, giddy up, because somebody had a prompting, you know? And I think if we start listening to not just our heads all the time, but our hearts, you get those little, I should call Steve and see if he's okay today. You know, let's not just talk about the new album, but let's just check on and how Steve's doing. Who, you know, me and Steve have bonded just for the fact that, you know, he had I hope you're okay with me saying this, Steve, but Steve had a big cancer scare a few years ago, you know? And because I was willing to be vulnerable, he knew I was willing to talk about my toughest days. He opened up to me when he was going through those tough days, you know? And all of a sudden you have a bond that's not just, hey, look, we do the same job. Now it's like, hey, we know that we're both willing to be vulnerable. I don't know if that answered your question, but yes, we do go negative way too often.
Yeah. Go back to what you said about checking in on other people. Sometimes it's difficult to get, and I'm sure you've had this yourself, difficult to get other people to open up, or even to necessarily know who to try to get up to open up. Do you have any recommendations of maybe things to look out for in other people? I mean, it's easy to kind of, well, it's easy to skim over the things in yourself, I suppose, but at least you know yourself a lot better than you know the inside of someone else. Is there any ways to maybe keep an eye on other people if you're working in close quarters with someone, if you were on tour with someone, for instance?
Well, the biggest thing is what they teach in mental illness is watch for a quick change in somebody's demeanor. Like, oh, she seems a lot quieter than normal. You know, are you okay? Like when you notice a drastic change, like let's say you're on these calls every week and one person was super vocal for 3 weeks in a row, and then week 4, man, they're really quiet right now. Or man, or you're out on the road, it's like, oh man, I don't see him laughing as much as normal, or he's drinking a little more than he normally does. You know, like I noticed, but it's all about paying attention. That's step one. You're never going to recognize a change in someone's behavior until you actually take the time to get to know somebody. And we can be so self-absorbed in this world that, like you said, we know ourselves really well because we live in a self-absorbed world where we look after ourselves. The moment you go like, I'm going to start paying attention to the people around me, so that when there is a change in their demeanor or their attitude or their drinking habits, you recognize it, because you know, you wake up in the morning and go like, I'm going to be aware today. You know, I'm going to look, I'm going to watch for those promptings, and I'm going to just get to know the people around me, not just what their gifts are, but what their more difficult days look like. So you can recognize the change in behavior in the people around you.
I'm going to jump in and steal some of your thunder too, because one of the things that you talk about that has been really interesting to me is when I started doing the tour with you and telling people, because I was doing it all the time, telling people what I was doing and explaining. And in the course of that, you know, bringing up mental health and making myself available to talk about it. Rob talks about making yourself available a lot. All of a sudden, there was all kinds of people in my world that did want to talk about it. And I wasn't digging. I wasn't saying, okay, do you have any mental health issues? Let's get them off your chest. It wasn't like that at all. It was just like, this is what I'm doing. It's really rewarding. I love doing it. It really resonates with me. I've had my own issues. And as soon as you make yourself vulnerable a little bit, and I cannot tell you how many people I'm fortunate to be in the group of people that work with Rob, and amongst us, it's okay to talk about all this stuff. It's amazing. But in my larger world, it's not always been that way. But now that I talk about it all the time, people are so willing. Many people are so willing and so looking for the opportunity to have that chat. They just don't. It's a weird thing to talk about for a lot of people. There's a lot of stigma attached to it. So making it okay and making yourself available has been kind of a revelation for me.
Yeah. And just to let you guys know too, like, you know, if you're a lawyer, you do a certain amount of pro bono work where you just like, I make a lot of money off of these cases, but I'll do a couple of cases a year that just are for free just because I'm going to help somebody. You know, Steve, just in his studio production, he's a multi-platinum producer, right? And when after I ripped up my record deal, like I was speaking with some for a youth thing in Vancouver where Steve is based, and I'm like, oh, the studio is just down the street where I recorded with Steve and Anthony and some of the other producers there, right? And I walked in and they're all sitting there and they're like, they didn't know really what happened to me. I'm the guy that had a record deal and we were doing a great album with, and all of a sudden I disappeared. And
it was going so well.
We were gonna make a lot of money off you, boy. and then I said, hey, this is what I've been doing. I'm like, and I'm gonna be speaking with a bunch of teenagers down the street. You guys want to come? So Steve and Anthony and some of the other producers, Sean and Dane and Adam, came down and they watched the show, and they were all like, whoa. Like they described it as like, man, that's cool. We're a part of something significant, right? Not just successful, but significant. There's a big difference. And it was Steve and his partner Anthony that were like, hey, Rob, we've done all right. Like we've got a lot of product, you know, albums in production, but if you need our help, let me know. And like Steve said, for over 10 years, we've been recording together. And for years, I was at their pro bono work. Like it was, hey, while we're doing these other albums, we want to give some of our time to help you with what you're doing, Rob. And all of us crave that piece of significance and belonging, right? And in fact, I'll say this, out of the 917 suicide notes, that's the only thing that they have in common. When I read the notes, they don't all wish they had a bigger house and a shinier car. All of them say, I feel insignificant, or I don't have purpose and I don't belong. So I think it's the opposite though. I think we're designed to be significant. We're supposed to spend at least a few hours a week doing something for somebody else, something that matters, something that's not just successful, but significant, that's impacting the world around them. And so Steve, for years, without getting $1 from me, was just helping with our album production. And then as we started growing, I'm like, hey man, nobody knows our sound better than you, Steve. What would you think about coming on the road and being our front of house guy? He's like, really? So he's a go-getter. So he starts learning front of house. And within no time, he took our sound from here to here because he's an all-in guy. And he committed to it. And now we get to work. And he's a paid employee on this tour, helping with album production, front of house. He does so many things and it all started with him just saying, hey, I want to be a part of this thing. And it's so rare to find that in the industry where somebody's willing to just spend a few hours, even a few hours a week or a month, where you're just doing something because it's the right thing to do. And I know Steve has told me many times how satisfying it feels to have done that. And it turned into a full-time gig where he's on the road with us now and gets to get a taste of that significance. That was me bragging you up a little bit.
No, it's fulfilling in a couple of amazing ways, but I mean the most obvious way is being in the room and seeing the kids have breakthroughs is, like, money aside, that is a very, very special thing, and it makes me feel very fulfilled to be a part of that. And so I didn't get to see it for a long time. I would come to the odd show, but you were on the road and I would work on studio stuff. And now that I get to be in the room, it's tremendously rewarding. And I definitely, as Rob alluded to, I had cancer 4 or 5 years ago, and rebuilding my life after that was very, very challenging for me. And now getting to be a part of this is really rewarding. And like, being a part of something that's bigger than myself is probably what saves me.
How did you find the transition, Steve, from working in just the studio to live work? I mean, I know you said there that it's been really fulfilling, but were there any challenges in the difference in working environment?
It's the engineering skills are so similar, especially now more than ever, because the plugins and digital consoles Like I'm using a lot of the same tools, but the approach is actually quite different. And my first couple of shows were an exercise in terror. and so I picked up where the previous guy had left off, and he was helpful to the point of like, well, here's where I was at, and go. So that was that. And uh, I was able to sort of port how I made the mixes of the songs over onto the board. So my starting point was at least pretty good, but I just learned very quickly that a lot of things that I do in the studio are just not going to work live. Like I can't turn a frequency up by 10 or 20 dB and poke around and look for it while the concert's happening, right? It's like, that's what I do in the studio. It's like, oh, there's a frequency there I don't like. What is that? Let me wiggle that around. That's it. And let me pull that out. I can't do that. So the transition was challenging technically, but I will say on the flip side, very exciting. Like being in the room and having a couple of huge arrays pointed in my direction is really fun. And the band is actually really phenomenal. So it makes it really, really enjoyable. But honestly, the band is so good. And, but that helps. But the transition for me technically was incredibly challenging. And as a couple of you know, I'm studying with Chris Raybould right now, and I'm still just learning a ton, but that's exciting too. So just embracing change. I've been fortunate enough to have a couple of mentors that taught me a few years ago that the magic happens outside of your comfort zone. And I've really embraced that. And so that's the journey that I'm on. And so I'm just so excited to be trying stuff that I haven't tried before, being in different environments and being humble. You know, like I ask for help in a way that I didn't when I was a younger producer and engineer. I go into any venue, and if there's a house guy, I tell him, hey man, I have no ego in this. If you've got things that you can tell me that help me, if you've got comments, if you know that I'm going to run into this, I want to know about it. And like, just if you want to be my guide, then I just appreciate it. And I've forged a lot of really great relationships. I know every house engineer in every venue that we've worked at, and I would say that I could pick up the phone and call any of them and have a really cool conversation. And I wasn't always like that, more because of insecurity. And just being humble and asking for help has been a really interesting and fun exercise, which I'm not scared to do anymore.
Do you enjoy the pressure of mixing live then? Because it's obviously a different kind of pressure from delivering a polished, finished mix in the studio, where you can kind of, you know, work to your own schedule. Whereas with the live world, you know, you've got an audience in front of you. There's no going back and fixing any mistakes afterwards. How did you find that?
I found it scary at first, and I still, it's kind of like stage fright. Like I always leave sound check feeling fairly unhappy because, you know, the rooms are empty and lots of reflections and reverb and everything like that. I'm getting more used to the idea now that a lot of that's going to get better, but I like the immediacy of playing live shows. I mean, it's really exciting, and it's loud, and it's forceful, and there's an audience in the room. I've been working on 3 mixes the last 3 days, and one of them was really challenging, and I had the opportunity to, when I'm working in the studio and I get lost, or I just don't quite know what to do, I just go get a drink of water or watch a YouTube for 10 minutes. Like I try not like get off on a tangent for an hour, but that's a tremendous luxury, is to be able to just do a reset. I'm petrified of something going sideways in a live situation, but by the same token, I think most of those things are in the rearview mirror if you let them be, in 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 minutes or something like that. But yeah, it's a big scary monster, that PA, sometimes, but embracing that, and you know, I had a mentor that said that fear and excitement are the same emotion. You can decide which way you want to look at it.
Yeah.
That's good.
Steve, that was really good. I don't have much to say on it. In fact, I'm going to piggyback off of what Rob said on something was about you gave the example of like lawyers will sometimes do pro bono. And I'm sure I was, for a while, a similar bit where like almost I was in this mood of like, well, every gig I do for sound, with the exception of maybe one or two things, I'm like, you always got to pay me for it, either union or it's like if we're doing freelance, you got to pay me really well. And obviously COVID happened. And I mentioned this before, and I've mentioned this previously on other things, where once a week at my local church, it's like a small congregation, like 25 people. And so they have no need for an actual sound system for it. They have like a projector and a small speaker system, but nothing that quote unquote needs my skill sets. But and I got an email from my mother forwarded to me to be like, hey, we know Scott does audio. Could he film it? And at first I looked down at my nose at it being like, I'm not going to do church work, even though I do go to church, but I was like, I'm not going to do that. Why would I need to do this? But then something in my head went, you know what, give it one try. What's the worst that can happen? You try it once and you can say, and I was like, oh, and already like when that day, like the person whose job I took over, she was one of those people at the church who had many jobs. I took over and she was already, I didn't even turn the camera on and she was already like, thank you, Scott. Thank you so much. It's one less thing I have to worry about. And she was like, and she then kind of edits them and I'm slowly trying to take over the edit. So it's one less thing she has to do. And just, she was so grateful for it. And like, it made her job easier. And to a point where I got to the point where I walk in, I have a messenger bag and all this. And like one of like the people who hands you the little pamphlets when you walk in of the sermon, he started going, here comes the movie producer. And not like as an insult, they were just like, you know, here comes the guy that's going to help do it. And it was just like, I'm getting goosebumps just already talking about it because they pay me like $20, but it's just like, I don't mind the small, like the pay drop, quote unquote. It just, because it feels like I'm doing something, whether you believe in God or not, it's just, I'm doing something for the community that it's greater than me. And I'm always constantly, and there's a great quote that I think Pooch says it, it's like, we're trying to make perfection in a non-perfect scenario. And I always have to remind myself that, and I'm just trying to make it better there, but it's just like, I'm helping others, you know, either that aren't able, because of COVID, aren't able to make it to the sermon, to the service or whatever. And I'm just like, I am helping someone else that isn't, you know, just, all right, give me the paycheck and let me get out of here. But it's like, which I never even when I do sound, but just that idea of like, oh, I'm helping others with even my skills, or at least my ability to like, okay, let me learn something new. Because from that, it kicked my rear to go, Scott, you should learn the basics of video editing. You don't have to be like a film editor, but just learning the basics. And that's been like another thing of like, try out a little something different that I haven't always thought to do.
Right. Well,
I just want to jump in. Sorry to interrupt, Rob. Both Rob and I have to go on the hour, so sorry to be a party pooper, but I just wanted to give you guys the heads up that we're probably.
That's fine. That's also kind of why I front loaded it to be we would talk mental and then kind of segue into tech.
Yeah, good. But just was a couple things. One, I learned this once, like when life, there's always stages you can be in. You can think about this, whether it's your physical health, your mental health, your finances, your relationships, your marriage, your family, your business, anything. There's moments you have to figure out where you are. And there's moments you can be as far down as suicidal, but you can get to survival. Okay, you're just trying to make it to the next day. That's survival mode. Again, whether it's your finances, your girlfriend, your marriage, your family, your business, whatever, you try to get from survival to stability. Okay, I'm stable. Okay, I'm stable. That's a good thing. And we try to get from stability to success. But success is where Hollywood stopped teaching. And that's why you don't see it so much in Hollywood. People get everything they thought they wanted, and there's still suicides. There's still overdoses because there's this one last step, and that's when you go from success to significance. And that's so key. If you don't do that, like when people, man, it's so sacrificial, Rob, that you ripped up a record deal to do this. This hasn't felt sacrificial. This is fulfilling. This is significant, and that matters. And on that note, I will get called away here in a sec here, but keeping with the route of like making sure everybody has a chance to say something. There's a few people that have been a little bit quiet before I bail. Is anybody else have anything they want to share or ask or anything like that? Just because I think it is important that everybody gets a chance to say their piece on any aspect, including this.
Yeah, I can go right now. At what point do you feel comfortable talking? Like, at, I guess, one point, like when in your mindset where you are kind of going through a rough patch where you said, like, I have no choice but to get it out or something bad's going to happen. Like in the case when that concert with all the students, like at that point you made the decision to say something because it could potentially help somebody else's life. So at that point, did you like, well, now it's like the time, now I feel comfortable because
sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, go ahead. I'm good.
If you're going to wait for the chance for it to be comfortable, you're never going to do it. There's no, okay, here's the comfort. That was not comfortable to say that from stage, but dang, it felt good afterwards. So to this day, I tell my story on tour every day, sharing the most vulnerable parts of my moments, not with my friends, not with people. I'm sharing this with thousands of people. And I know that most people are just, hey, I'm just here for a concert. Like, dude, chill. Like, you have to go there. So I'm trying to entertain 80% of that crowd while realizing that 1 in 5 people in that crowd, that's the stat, at least in Canada, 1 in 5 people have seriously considered suicide in the last 12 months. That's the stat. With COVID, it's through the roof. It's way more than that now. So if you wait for the moment when it's going to be comfortable to share something, you'll never say it. It's never comfortable. But when you realize that, hey, like that day when I first shared it, I was like, hey, I never want to do that again, even though it felt pretty good to get that out. But then I looked at the stats. Well, if 1 in 5 people has seriously considered suicide, it was the next concert. I'm like, I got to do it again. Not comfortable. But I said it again, guys, if you felt suicidal, you're not alone. I was there once too. And I did it again. It still wasn't comfortable. But guess what? A young guy came up to me and gave me his note. And that's when it became a focus of the show. But it's never going to be comfortable. It's going to be like, hey guys, I got to share something that is not comfortable. And don't wait for the whole world to understand it. Some people are going to be like, whoa, I don't get you. But by opening up, there'll be one person in this call that might only be one that goes like, hey, no, I hear you. The fact that you guys work in this industry, I would guess that it's more than one person that has experienced something similar, because it is working within the arts, and you guys know what isolation feels like on the road, or being in a bus, or being home now with COVID. So it may not ever be comfortable, but that doesn't mean it's not important. Like Steve said, with sound, the difference between being fear and excitement are kind of the same thing. Is that what you said, Steve? Fear and excitement?
Yeah, they're the same emotion. You just gotta decide which way you're going with it, kind of.
Yeah. So in the same way, it's like waiting for comfort. Comfort isn't what you're looking for. It's just, it's going to be uncomfortable, but it's also that same like adrenaline. It's like, whew, that felt good getting that off my chest.
Yeah, it's very much like what Jason Reynolds said in the diversity talk, when someone said that it's, it might not be in your personality to speak out against someone who's making racist or sexist comments, and he said it doesn't matter if it's your personality or not. At some point, you've kind of just got to go for it and just do the right thing.
Yeah.
It feels uncomfortable, but sometimes it just needs doing.
Yeah, because I'll be perfectly honest, Rob, I was the one who asked Steve. I was like, part of me was like, Rob is probably going to say no, but the other part of me was just like, screw it. The worst he says is no. So there's that uncomfortableness that there's this, the saying is asking you shall receive, knocking the door shall open. But to go to the point of like, yeah, sometimes if you wait for the moment, to kind of give it a more comedic, there's this picture of a skeleton covered in cobwebs laying over a mixing board, and the caption is, "The mix is almost perfect." There never is going to be that perfect time to talk to somebody about it. Obviously, there are some moments where it's like, okay, this is not the right moment. This is the wrong moment, but the right moment will never really tell you, hey, this is the moment to talk to somebody about mental health. Sometimes you have to make it that moment.
Yeah, and good work jumping in, Scott. That was really, really good of you to jump out. And I didn't know if Rob would be available or not, but, thankfully, Rob is always, he just jumped in. Yeah, I'll move a couple things around. I want to talk about this with anybody I can. And
Yeah,
so good for you for asking, and thank you to Rob for making it possible.
Yeah, thank you for your time, Rob. We appreciate it.
Maybe you guys will be on tour with us soon, maybe. Who knows?
Hopefully.
Got a good crew going here.
All right. Well,
cheers.
Thank you, Steve and
Thank you.
Rob.
Thank you so much, Rob.
Thank you.
Of course. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Sorry, guys. We got to run, but thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers,
All right.
Dave.
Cheers.
Rob.
Bye.
Well, that was fun and cool. And I think this might be a fun topic that we'll always circle back to, or maybe just talk a little bit in the future. Is it's like the challenge too about this, and I've mentioned this, I kind of alluded to it during the health and safety one last week, is we are in an industry that doesn't exist to people. So we're always told, like, if you're doing your job right, no one's noticing you. So we have that mentality shoved into our heads of that, and speaking out or talking to somebody about that uncomfortable, it like goes against, in theory, of all this, oh, we need to be the people in the shadows because speaking out about this. So I think that can be the one time where we can say, forget that rule. My mental health is more important than that. Obviously, it's not, you don't do it during the middle of the show, but it's just that idea of like some things of what we're taught and to be a good mixer of stagehand kind of needs to be like, no, forget that. I care. It's and just that idea of like, I was also thinking of this whole thing that Lee and I started of like, we had this little community of something, and I'm going to kind of offer it too. Like, if you see me on like Goes to 11 and you just want to talk, unless I say I am in the middle of something right now, talk. And I think that's what it is like, yeah, we may not be experts or even have an idea of what proper mental health is, but we can all just kind of be that person just to talk. Because often a lot of people, and this will me open up again, my therapist, I see mostly just as for someone to listen. And I think all of us too, is because we're always constantly told, be quiet, don't make a sound, don't be noticeable, and just having someone. And I've also known friends too who are just like, Scott, just, I'm going to rant. You did nothing wrong. I just need someone to rant at. Knowing that, like, shouting out at the universe that someone has listened, ultimately, it's, I think, a healthy thing for all of us to do.
Yeah, it's important. One thing I'd like to discuss, and I would have liked to have got to this before Rob had to go, but I was going to ask Kim to speak on this first. Because
Speak on which, sorry? Oh, I lost you. Oh, hello? Now you're back. Sorry, I think I unplugged my headphones. Oh. I'm back.
Balancing work and home life. That must be an interesting one for you, because there's a certain amount of overlap for you, I believe.
Definitely, yeah. There's some overlap. I mean, most of my work is not with my husband, although we do some work together, like with the production recording side of things. And that, it definitely can be kind of tough to balance, because it's like, when do you stop talking about work and when do you just hang out, or, if things aren't going well, how do you talk about that? Because you can't go home and be like, gosh, what was up with that dude today? When, that dude's at home too. But I mean, by and large, though, we have a pretty good work-home life relationship. Like, when we do work together, we have a pretty good way of turning it off when the session's over or when everybody goes home or whatever. So that, we've come to a pretty good agreement with that. We'll see what happens when we start traveling together more and there's less chance to turn it off and to go home, Yeah.
But, well, maybe COVID's been a trial run of that.
It has been really interesting. Like, we both work a lot and we both travel a lot with work, but not together. So it has been really weird spending this much time together, you know, and working on more projects together at home. And it's been really interesting. It's been really good. I know some people, I think it's kind of gone one of two ways. Either you realize that the person you live with drives you crazy, or you realize, oh, I really like this person. Like, this worked out. So yeah, but it's been really interesting to work on more projects together, actually. Yeah.
Is he in the background? Can he?
I think he's doing something around here, but yeah.
Not under duress or anything.
Yeah. I don't.
What? Sorry, go on.
Oh no. What else was I going to say? Oh, I had one other thing that I was going to say that Steve made me think about. Was when he was talking about change and how dealing with change is so hard. And I feel like in my conversations with people over the past couple months, that's been like the main theme of like, it's just really hard to change my plans, you know, to change my routines and what I'm doing and what I was working towards. But I also heard him talking about live sound versus production, and like change and dealing with changes in your plans and unpredictable, and you don't know what the room's going to sound like, is totally part of that job too. So like, I think all of us, we have the skills to deal with like things changing and unpredictable, and maybe things all of a sudden go sideways and, you know, you have to recalibrate. So like, the skills are there. It's just adapting them to different things. I was thinking about that while he was talking. Wanted to bring that up.
What about you, Do? We spoke just before we started recording about how you've been kind of self-taught in all your sound education. So you're obviously someone who likes to just spend a lot of your own time still thinking about work. Do you kind of limit your time on that? Do you find yourself reading into the night, or do you set limits? Anyone? What about you, Scott?
Well, for me, well, which Scott? Now there's two Scotts.
Either?
Well, I'll mention, and then other Scott can mention. For me, it's like I kind of have a daily routine where I don't really have it in stone, but usually in the morning I'll have breakfast, let it settle, chill for a bit, then do my workout, which is one thing I've felt really good that has benefit of. I worked out before COVID, but like this has now enabled me, because like before COVID, like I actually had to be really hyper aware of my workout. Like, perfect example was I couldn't go hard on leg day, you know, insert leg day joke here, but it's like, because I knew I'm like, if I work tomorrow, what if I suddenly get a call and I'm gonna have to be on my feet for 8 hours? I don't want my feet hating me. So I always had to be strategic, or like I could push, but I couldn't push because I knew there was always that possibility of like, what if I get the call, or what if tomorrow is a work day? And even for me physically, even when I do get sound gigs, it still has to be somewhat physical. So I'm like, I can't push too hard and I can't have too much of a recovery. But kind of getting back onto it. And then after my workout, usually I try to reserve some point of the day, you know, to either learn a little bit more about lighting, audio, video. And some days I'll always lean more obviously towards audio, because that's at the end of the day my passion. But I always try to learn stuff new day, and also like I'm trying to slowly learn French using Duolingo, and like trying to activate, you know, try and learn something new. But there'll be a certain point, and I'm kind of mentioning this because I'm not ashamed to say it. I have attention deficit hyper disorder. And what that allows me to do, I also take medication for it. I can have a lot of focus, and a really strong focus. And it's why I also love doing live sound, is because that requires all this focus. But there'll be at a point at the end of the day where I'm just like, my brain is gone, all right, that part of your brain's done for the day, it's fried. And I'll just be like, all right, cool. But it's also even that my brain will still think, like laying in bed, I'll be like, maybe at this venue I could do this and try this method. So it never really turns off, but I try to at least shift it into lower gear, and like every day try and like watch something, watch something fun, whether it be, or watch something educational too, like where Steve mentioned earlier, like if, you and I are doing a fun back and forth mix down of a track, I'll hit a wall and I'll be like, I'll either watch something educational that either Scott, Alec, or Nathan has released, or I'll be like, I'm just going to watch stupid cat videos for 5 minutes. Or even I'm going to go outside. And it's that whole idea of, it goes to something else too. Back in the old analog days, while people still had burning mix out, it was burnout when mixing, because you had to hit rewind and your tape had to rewind. You even had that minute or two where you could just be like, maybe I don't need the reverb on that snare to be that loud. Now we can just instantly go boop and press home and we're at the beginning. So I think as much as, and I love technology, just having those moments where we walk away from what we're doing and just let our mind think, walk outside for a few minutes. So that kind of went off the topic, but I think it's also knowing both mentally and physically what your limits are and like when to kind of change things around. And I hope, does that kind of answer what you're asking to, Liam?
Yeah. I don't know how much of this you caught, Scott, and good evening or good afternoon, whatever time of day it is where you are.
It's afternoon, 4 p.m.
Yeah. We're just talking about the balance between home and work life and how people split their day up. Do you have any kind of, I know it's kind of a totally different time to usual touring times of the year, but how are you splitting things up at the moment? Are you sticking to any kind of schedule, or are you just kind of freeballing it and seeing how you feel?
Well, I mean, nowadays, yeah, because I don't have to answer to anybody, just kind of doing whatever I feel like. But I mean, it's a hard balance. Oh, but before we get into that, I do want to say, Scott, I know a lot of people with ADD, ADHD that get really into production, that production makes them satisfy something in their brain, whatever it is. I've met a bunch of people who are like, whatever it is that about this ADD or whatever, music production really like kind of sorts it out and kind of makes them feel better. So
yeah, for someone who has it, the misconception is like, oh, you can't focus. I'm like, no, it's the complete opposite. It's and for me, it's more, you can actually, it's extreme focus that just shifts, but especially when medicated. But why most people are like, the bigger the channel count gets, the more intimidated. I'm like, bring it on, because that is now, because you want to see me the most boring when I mix is give me, what I call a singing strum, where it's one person and a guitar. I'm like, okay, vocals in this, but give me a 20-piece world music band. I'm like, all right, let's have some fun.
Well, devil's in the details with all these connections. You're building, especially in live sound, like it has to be right. So you have to go through and make sure all these little bits are right to get the whole thing done. It's a lot of doing.
But I think also the more the thing is with Scott Moore is like, before COVID, like when you were on tour with all these bands, like how did you kind of keep yourself, as I like to say, how did you keep yourself from going nuts? Like, what would you do between, or with what little time you'd have during the day? How did you keep it all together?
Well, I mean, there's two issues. I guess one is trying to split tour life and just home life, and then also what to do when home to not just kind of like sink into the void, but the answer to the second question is, for me, that's why I do the production academy, so I have something to do that's outside of touring. So it's just been something else to be creative with and sink my attention into, and also play music a lot. I mean, that really that's cathartic. It makes me feel good. So that's what I do when I'm home, and I'm, and obviously the Production Academy is a massive project, a massive undertaking, and I have decades of work left to do on it. Actually, I've been sitting here scripting a show power course for the past week, so that'll be out soon. But like splitting the time between home and tour is hard. Right after I got married, I pretty much left for 12 months. And I got home after a year, and my wife was like, I don't feel like I know you very well right now. It's like, I'm not doing that again. So that has gone into which clients I choose. One of the reasons I've been mixing Haim for so long is they do not like to work that hard. I mean, I say that flippantly, but they work hard. They work their asses off. But they don't like to go out on tour. They don't they're not going to hit the road and go for 10 months a year. But a band like Portugal the Man, who I also do some gigs with once in a while, they do that's what their year is going to look like. They're going to put out a record and go. Part of the reason is that like the main songwriter, his wife is on tour with them all the time, so they have that going. But but like working for young pop bands, like I kind of used to do, it's a lot of those bands get, they kind of have to take the money when they can. If they get a hot record, they're going to take every show. Their label, their manager, their booking agent, everyone is just going to push for them to take the money that's on the table, because you don't know how long it's going to last. So
touring worlds where all their money's going to be coming from these days with this, a lot of people are getting music through streaming services now, and the bands themselves are not getting an awful lot of a cut of that compared to back in the days of records. Yeah,
not even close. Spotify, I mean, it's just the whole thing is tough, and on that side of the industry. I mean, obviously everyone's was relying on live music to pay the bills, and that's good for people that like to, work in live music. The industry was healthy, and it will be again, but there's just so much revenue, and when people are comfortable paying higher prices for tickets, and I think even more so when this all comes back, I think it's going to be more about experience. Yeah, people are going to try to make it even more of an experience, a live experience, and probably ticket prices will go up and all that. But in any case, I tend to choose clients that don't work, massively. So that's kind of how I get a better balance. And I've learned how to say no, which is hard to do when you're a freelancer.
Yeah, and even
sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Well, I was just going to say too, Scott, is like the saying the no is because, at least to tell my experience, before I got my union card, like I said yes to every single one, even if it was like, this is miserable, I'm going to lose money on this. But it's just that whole idea of like, just make money, just keep showing. And it's just realizing I'm like, especially after I got my card, there was a confidence I got of like, wait, I can say no. Like I still usually say 9 times out of 10, I will say yes, but the idea of like knowing when to say no or go, I'll help on like load-in day, but like all this pre-rig and all this, I'm like, no, I'm saying no to that because this is an insane time that it's just going to burn me too much. And it's interesting too, you mentioned like, working like with bands like Haim who, do short blasts or whatever. It's like, it's also interesting just on a side note, like one band I always like to quote is Queens of the Stone Age. Someone had interviewed them and saying, I've interviewed bands on the touring cycle and they're always burned out, yet every year I see you guys, you're fine. And Josh had said, because we do microburst touring, we tour for 2 or 3 weeks and then go home and don't see each other for another week or two. And it's like one of the many reasons why I always dream of doing tours with them is like that idea. One, I like their music, but 2, it's like that idea of like, yeah, tour, take a break. And a lot of other even bigger bands, like I think Rush did a similar thing, a little bit of a higher scale, but like, because they have families and children, and it's like, they like going on tour, but they also care about their family. So it's that whole idea of learning that balance. And it'll be interesting to see if that balance returns to like.
No, I mean, especially bands at a certain level, or when they've been doing it enough and they start to appreciate that home stuff. I mean, I think it's a really common thing for bands to do, like 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 3 weeks on, a month off. Like it is. I don't see it all the time. With bands that can afford to do that, I mean, obviously it's expensive because if you're paying, if you have 10 crew people and you're paying them a travel day or an extra 2 travel days every 2 weeks, it's going to add up. But if bands can afford it, they know that to invest in themselves because they know the longevity of the whole thing is going to be better. So, but then in the country world, pretty much around Nashville, it's all weekends. So if you work in production, like I have so many friends.
Yeah, I was going to chime in and say that like,
yeah, so like I have a lot
in
of friends
Nashville, I know so many people, they call it weekend warrior tours.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, my internet's crapping out. Hang on. Talking over you.
Yeah, so like that's really common. A lot of my friends like do that, but then, so you're at least able to be home a lot more and it's more family style and all that. And then I have some friends, this band I worked for forever called The Hold Steady. They're like a bar rock band. fun to mix, super great. We were talking about guitar solos in that webinar the other day. Like that's like fucking writing guitar solos all the time. It's awesome. They're a killer band, and I worked for them forever. But I mean, they're all older than I am. You know, half of them are in their 50s. Like they don't want to. You know, they're not going to get on a bus. It just there's 6 of them, and just getting people together for like a month-long tour or 2, even 3 weeks is not going to happen. So what they do is they have like 5 weekends or 6 weekends every year, and they'll go play like 4 shows in one city and then go home. And a few weeks later, go do 4 shows in another city and go home, that sort of thing. So, I mean, there are different models for how people do all this stuff. And it does come down to balancing, to making that balance. And, you know, people realize that you have to have, if you want longevity, you do have to strike that balance.
Right, and I remember, Scott, during your present, we kind of touched on this. You and your co-presenters kind of touched on this idea during when you did the live sound summit presentation. And I forget his name. It was Ryan from This Tour Life.
Yeah, Ryan George.
Yeah, and it was just interesting of like that idea of like, I forgot my point, but it was just like this idea of how unhealthy the typical tour life is, both mentally and physically. Because it was, even though I'm a local person, I saw on that list, I was like, man, just made me think of like, if I was a touring person, like how would my health be in a tour compared to being at home? So it's just something to think about of like, how can we strike that balance, like both for the mental and physical health of like, when this does get back to normal or whatever normal might be look like, it's like, how can we make sure that when we all go back out there, whether we be local or touring, it's like that we try and keep some of these healthy habits we've kept.
Well, it's all about habits, right? You got to just have a good habit. You got to do your exercises every day. Like I do a physical therapy thing every day with this stretching band. It's all like postural exercises. So I stand up straight, you know, but the only way to do that is with like constant exercise, daily routines and that sort of thing. And I think, especially when touring, if you have that sort of thing, I mean, that's a great touring thing. So it's just a little band I can take with me. I could do it in a hotel room or whatever. But if you have those things, it's, you know, it's when you set up hurdles for yourself, like, oh, I'm going to go find a gym and do this. Like that doesn't work. You need like something easy to do that you know how to do, that is you just wake up and do, and doing that, exercising that way in like a daily fashion, I think is really kind of a key to tour health.
Yeah, and I forget, one of the people you had interviewed, I forget his name, he had mentioned that, you know, he brought a yoga mat with him on tour. And that kind of inspired me. And even before that, like when I knew I was going to be gone for the entire day of a show, it would suck. I'd wake up 20 minutes earlier before I normally did. And I would just do yoga, like 10, 15 minutes in the morning. And I found it made such a huge difference because my body, first of all, I was more awake. And I already had stretched out. I do stretches before we even want to get on the site, but that idea of like, it's the little thing of just doing those stretches in the morning, get your body ready to go. Because I forget where I think it was during my OSHA training. It was like, they were like, load in and load out is not your workout because that is an efficiency of motion. You're trying to do all these activities as efficient, and exercise is the polar opposite. When like lifting weights, for example, you're trying to get the most resistance that you can to build muscle. So that's the whole idea of like, that whole idea of like, you know, load out, load in, it does not count as exercise. But I kind of went off on a tangent. If kind of anyone else wants to like, or Scott, I might have like kind of.
No, I just think on that tip too, you know, if you stretch or do yoga in the morning or whatever, like just all the actions you go through of lifting and stuff, you're just going to do it better. And your body, you know, if you always start from that point of being ready to work, ready at the beginning of a day with load in, being stretched out, ready to go, you're at the end of load in, which is only like a little bit into your day, you know, at the end of load in, you're not going to be like tweaked out and like walking strangely and stuff. And that it's like a snowball effect when you don't start off the day right.
I do agree with you, Scott, just as from my experience. Let me tell you, load in for a musical will sometimes last 8 hours. But yeah, for your typical rock and roll show. But no, it's still the same idea of even at the end of the day is you should still stretch out, even if it's only a few hours. And it's learning ergonomics too, of like the basic thing. There was this great saying. It was like, if it can be don't lift something that can be pushed. Don't push something that can be rolled. Don't move something that doesn't need to be moved.
What about the more technical sides of things then?
Yeah, I think we've kind of talked about this. So this is more to like talk about. So we did kind of mental and physical maintenance. Now it's like, because this all started from Liam and I having this fun discussion about, outboard gear versus wave servers and all this. And it's like, we were saying, yeah, it's computers, but it's like Liam had mentioned his example and also my example of my gear of like, I've, knock on wood, yet to have a piece of my equipment completely, utterly fail on me. And I feel now that maintenance also is a bit. Obviously, gear being chucked around in an 18-wheeler on the highways, no matter how nice you take care of it, it's going to affect it. But it goes like, what kind of preventative maintenance do you all do on your equipment when you can?
Or if you're not in a position where you're doing preventative maintenance, if everything's coming from a hire shop, what kind of things do you maybe prepare for yourself before you start a job or a tour or whether it's one-off or 6 months or whatever? Do you have a kit bag? Do you turn up with a show file on a USB stick? Are you turn up on the day with nothing? What kind of prep work are people doing just to know that when they first start opening those flight cases on that first day, that they're not going to hit a big brick wall? Has anyone got anything that they actually prepare ahead of time?
I was thinking about just this weekend. I was working and I was thinking, man, I need to open this rack up during the week before the next show and just like clean everything up. Just thinking about signal flow, thinking about if something does go wrong, do I know where each one of these cables is plugged in? If one of them isn't working, do I know how to find where it is, And if it's a giant mess back there, that's not doing you any favors. So even just making sure things are clean and organized, making sure your cable routing along the floor, along the stage is good. Like that's something that comes to mind there. It's not necessarily maintenance, but it is going to help you out if you do run into problems. Mm-hmm.
What about you, Scott? You definitely delved into a bit of this with your dual console show file situation. Have you gone any further into that? Are you having any luck?
Oh, with the dual console thing?
Yeah, well, having a backup on a Digicore show file as well as your usual Avid.
I mean, oh yes, as far as being prepared, I mean, I think it's a good idea to have. Yeah. It's a good idea to have starting show files. I think for everything. Yeah. Like anything that you can get online and like have a, if you're touring or even if you're not touring, whatever, just to like know kind of basically how all these show files work and have a starting ones where you're like. Yeah. You load the file and like, oh, I know my subs are on aux 8, there you go, or whatever. Or I know my monitor sends, or I know 1 through 4 is patched this way, and you can quickly get something up and make it go. So I mean, I think that's kind of, but honestly, I get a little lazy with a lot of it because I am on all hire gear. It's all rental. It's all, I use 8th Day 90% of the time, so I know exactly what's in their work boxes. So I show up with a pair of headphones and a USB stick and an iLock, but I don't know. I wouldn't recommend other people to do that. I just get lazy sometimes.
Do you sit at home with an offline editor then and sort things out, or do you have access? Because I know for your comparison, you had access to 2 desks at the same time, but was that in a venue or?
Oh, that was in production rehearsals for. Right. A tour for Haim. They let's see, that was earlier this year. So we had one festival in March in Florida, and it was like right as everything was kind of crashing down. It was, but just even to do that one festival, they hadn't done a gig in a long time, so we had to like spend a week in LA going through all the gear, building it, just rehearsing, and they had to run all the songs, and we had to make sure all the show files were good. So we spent a week in LA before I even going to Florida to do that. So that's when I had both consoles set up because I wanted to try to get prepared for the coming album cycle that is postponed. Yeah.
Were you starting your show file from scratch on those two on those two consoles, or were you sort of working from an existing show file that you already had?
The Avid file I've been working on for years.
Okay.
So I was just kind of like transferring a lot of it to Digico. A lot of it was just kind of like, I mean, a lot of it I just looked at numbers, you know,
Yeah.
what's the bandwidth and how much am I cutting, and kind of cut and move them over and kind of see how it sounded. So,
yeah.
But you know, it's just like again, like fail safe. There's not the budget in that band to make sure we have the console we want everywhere we go, no matter what. We're gonna like ship it there and spend $10,000. You know, like that's just, it's not a budget. Like if huge bands like the Killers or something like that, you know, Kenny's always gonna have his SSL, no matter what venue they're doing. It doesn't matter where they are in the world. That console's gonna make it there. So just kind of a little extra work you got to do to like be safe at a certain level.
But you're fairly confident that between an average show file and a Digico, you're gonna be covered.
It'd be all right. It wouldn't be great, but it would be. We got the show done.
Yeah.
You know, if we're out in the middle of a field in Denmark and like, oh, actually, sorry, we don't have an S6L here. Like, the production manager screwed up. Sorry, you know, like, here's an SD10.
Yeah. Like,
you know, or whatever. You know, it just who knows what happens. And if you don't have any backup, then it can be a terrible day. And that's happened to me once. This band Passion Pit I used to tour with, pop band, and we were running 48 channels, and we got to some festival outside Paris, and there wasn't. That was a while ago, so I think it was on a profile, what I was usually touring with, and they didn't have one, so they're like, well, here's a PM5D, it's all you get, and there's nothing to be done about it. So with a 15-minute changeover, I didn't get to touch the desk before then, and there's no like online editor for that, so it was like get on the desk and try to in 15 minutes throw together 48 channels, and they just go, and there's just like synths and all this stuff going all over the place. It was a rough show, but
did you get there in the end?
Yeah, I mean the show happened.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I had that happen with a Digico. I don't know if Liam, you're a Digico dude. Maybe you know about this. I hadn't really done anything on Digico, and I was preparing for this one-off, and I built a scene file on the offline editor for an SD9. And then I show up and they said, oh, well, we haven't updated our firmware on this desk. It's like 2 versions back. So you can't load your file. And I was like, okay, so I just have to convert it and they're like, no, it's just not going to work.
Yeah,
and I had to build it from scratch. Ugh.
Sorry, forwards compatibility.
Mm-hmm.
You can load show files from an older version of the software, but you can't. If you've got an older version of the software installed on the console, you can't install from a newer version.
Oh, yeah. It was such a pain.
I've been there, Kim. I've been there. Same thing.
You'd think these console manufacturers would make like a legacy machine or offline editor be like, hey, you have version 5, but you have to work with a 4. Throw the file into here. You'll lose stuff, but you'll at least have a workable file that you could like go from. And I'm like, why hasn't anyone like done so? To my knowledge, none of the digital manufacturers have made that, which would be a godsend. I think
it's just too complicated, you know, like all the software development that would go into making that like bug free would be expensive, I think. And they're, you know.
Yeah, they really just want you to update your firmware, which
they should.
You know.
I've walked into houses with an X and an M32, and I'm like, why aren't you on the new firmware of this? And they're like, oh, we don't know. I'm like, you do know that like the new firmware gets rid of the patching issue that everyone has with the X and M32.
It's a bit controversial though. It adds other problems, but that's specific to that, you know.
But I've not had issues with the new firmware, but that's me personally.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I think they're working on it, but it does fix so many problems, man.
Oh yeah, just like the patching alone is worth its weight in gold of like how much you got to, because it's like, but that's another topic. But like to continue on the maintenance one thing I do, like I often do this on musicals, like I will bring a thing of multi-surface Windex. Like there have been boards where I'm like, no one has cleaned this thing in like a year. It's got grime, dust, and all this. And I'm just like, I dampen a paper towel with the Windex and just do that. And just already it makes the difference. Just because like, I find I work better when I'm on a clean surface, because we've all walked up to that soundboard, no matter what the manufacturing is, where you're like, it's dirty and like you're now hesitant to touch anything. And this is pre-COVID. And just I felt like giving the board just a quick clean with that just made me feel more confident on like my work surface. And kind of to like Liam, you had asked about a bag. Usually my backpack, I have a few different ones. I have my main backpack, but then I have this other bag where it has one like a 20-foot XLR, an SM57, drumsticks, moon gel. I think I have a few other miscellaneous things like gaff tape and like board tape, just because like you never know when something needs gaff, and you never know when you might need to label something, even on the digital board. Like sometimes just having that label going, oh, this is good. When I hit this custom key, it's mix 1, makes your life so much easier. Like I had a show where I'm on a CL5, and having that labeling that I can label everything made my workflow so much quicker. And to go back, I forget who said this, just, okay, it was you. Like whenever I set up a show, even if I'm not the one setting it up, I'll come through just to make sure it's clean. So I'm like, okay, this is where everything is patched.
Yeah, just doing a walkthrough so that, you know, if something does go down, if somebody trips over a power cord, you know where that's plugged in, you know, at the very least.
Yeah, and just sometimes doing a line check, because there's this one venue where they were, long story short, they were being cheap and didn't want me to come in 1 extra hour early to set up everything. And I sent him my patch sheet, and turns out there was 2 versions. He sent the version that it wasn't going to be. So I then had to go through it. So I had to still line check that entire thing. But it's to kind of go back to the neat topic that Liam and I had started, was like wondering about maintenance, like things like wave servers or outboard gear, wondering like if anyone who's experienced that, if like feeling like, well, the maintenance, if you've done, what would the proper maintenance be? And like if you did better maintenance of it, did that then lead to less chance of catastrophic show failure?
One thing I'm noticing while you're talking about waves servers there is mine keeps hitting CPU overload while it's doing nothing, which is a bit weird.
Because it's just, that's the interesting thing, is as we get more and more digital, no matter what the manufacturer is, we're using computers. And so just like on the computer, sometimes just a quick restart of it seems to be the solution. And I love people who go with the argument, well, analog's better. I'm like, no, the XL4 was prone because it used 2 power. And I've heard several versions of the stories, because it had 2 power units. If one wasn't properly put in, the thing would be like, yeah, I'm not working.
A lot of those old consoles had 2 power supplies because one would go down often, you know. So
yeah, I think it's sometimes.
Yeah, analog has tons of cards and stuff that can get knocked out, you know. Same thing.
Yeah, I think it's always the thing why I also try, and at least me personally, I always try to arrive early to a venue, just so I can spend 5-10 minutes looking over the board, you know, playing my songs. But it's like, I do that to check the entire system, not just, oh, how does it sound? I'm like, is everything I need for today's show actually working, before I even worry about how it sounded?
Hey guys, I'm sorry, I gotta run. Nice to see everybody.
Thanks for coming, Scott.
The computer stuff is so hard, because like you really have to dig in and like make the effort to learn that stuff, especially like if we're talking about like how are you learning to do audio, and you really have to make the effort to do the computer side of things, because it's not as easily accessible. Like my learning project over the past few weeks has been like RF troubleshooting and RF coordination stuff, because I had just been kind of like faking my way through it for a long time, you know, just knowing enough to get it done, but not enough to fix it if it wasn't working, you know. And I think it's the same thing probably with these wave servers. Like you have to almost give yourself a little bit of a computer science course in order to properly take care of it.
There's a lot of like networking and that side of the IT world that it's getting more and more involved in audio. It's in CPU overload again. The only time this is going off on a bit of a tangent, but it kind of comes under maintenance. One thing I have noticed with Wave servers is sometimes you load up a show file and it will be running quite high on the system usage, and then if you reload the same show file, it will come through fine, and it seems to be how the processing gets distributed between the cores of the CPU when it first boots up, which it's just completely unpredictable. Like, and you can't finish building a show file and then just go, well, I've got that working fine now, so it's going to be fine from now on. It seems to be different. Like sometimes it'll be in the mid 70s, and then the next time I load it, it'll be up into like mid to high 80%. And obviously, you know, if you're at them kind of levels, a jump of 10%'s a bit dangerous. It's not what you want in a show situation. So it'd be interesting to know if there's any maybe software maintenance that I should be doing on the Mac Mini that's running Waves. Because as much as most of the processing is not actually done on the Mac Mini, it's done in the server itself. Maybe there's just something on the Mac Mini side where maybe things are not getting distributed properly, or I don't know. So maybe that's something that I should look into. I'll have to make a mental note of that, and you know, maybe send Waves an email. Gregory, am I right in thinking that you're fairly new to live sound? Do you have any kind of work bag set up that you take with you, or are you still kind of at the situation where you're just winging it?
Yeah, I'm just like a stage technician. Yeah. So okay, I've never been behind a board before yet. So
yeah,
still fairly new to this whole live sound.
Cool. I'm trying to think what essentials I was touring. The last tour when we went to Germany, I packed a full production case of my own, so it was a little more than a case, just because I kind of had a few new things that I wanted to take with me and just have a play with while I had a chance to be out on the road with them. But it was a Pelly case sort of size thing before that. I mean, I was touring a pair of these headphones, a comms headset, which is probably going to be really handy to own when we do start going back to work, because there's probably not going to be many people that want to put a house-owned comms headset near their mouth. The guys I work for are touring, or the guys I was working for earlier in the year, they tour their own full comms set, so that's all good. Earplugs, a decent set of flat response earplugs. I wouldn't necessarily mix a show in them unless it was a show that I knew back to front. I did get through, I think it was the last pantomime run that we have the pleasure of having in the UK. Once I got to the point where I was comfortable knowing what that show sounded like, and I wasn't using my ears for much other than listening out for cues, kind of just popped those in and didn't have to listen to 600 screaming kids every day. But yeah, I mean, it's handy to have some of your own bits and bobs. It's good to know that you've got the things that you know you're going to need. But and it's also one of them things that... Sorry, go on.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, thinking about, like, what are the, like, desert island, like, when I first started doing gigs, like, I feel like a multi-tool, like something that has, like, a wrench, plier, a couple screwdriver ends, and a knife. I use that all the time. That and a couple Sharpies in my pocket, and it'll probably be okay.
Yeah, just don't lend your Sharpies to anyone.
No. No.
There's a great meme I saw, like, the first 1 or 2 months into COVID. It was like, yeah, say what you will about COVID, but I haven't lost any of my Sharpies.
Mm-hmm. That's solid.
And it reminds me of that kid. It's like the basics. I always have our gloves, multi-tool, Leatherman, Craftsman, whichever, Swiss Army knife, whichever brand you pick, crescent wrench, gloves, and a notepad, and a few other things, gum, earplugs, flashlight. People are like, oh, you got a flashlight on your phone. I'm like, yeah, it's good in a pinch, but I'm like, there's something I feel when someone uses an actual flashlight over the phone. I don't know, just I feel like the amount of respect I have for you as a technician just goes up substantially when I see
Mm-hmm.
you using a flashlight. To,
I was going to bring up the point about someone asking to borrow it and the fact that you wouldn't want to lend them your phone. But to be honest, I'm not sure what I feel worse about, the idea of handing my phone to someone or handing them a torch or a flashlight to you Americans. That spends quite a lot of its time in my mouth. You know, crawling around under drum risers with a torch in your mouth, you really don't want to go handing it to someone else,
You
especially
guys
when
got
you're
to
in
get
the
on the
crash zone.
headlamp life.
Yeah,
I'm a big headlamp advocate.
yeah, I got to get myself one of those.
Mm-hmm.
It's surprising how many people won't wear them. I've
Oh
met
man,
quite a few people that'll just refuse to wear them because they think they look stupid. But
I'm gonna be
you know,
suited up the next time I have to load a trailer in the dark. I'm gonna have my mask covering this part, and then the glasses, and
Yeah.
then the headlamp. I'm gonna be
yeah,
totally covered head to toe.
And yeah, like, oh, I look stupid. I'm like, we all wear black and wear boots. Like, really, we're not going on the cover of GQ. Anybody get a
Mhm.
hold of yourselves. Of I don't want to look silly. It's like, get over yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Do you guys label your stuff that you don't want to get stolen? I have
Yes.
screwdrivers that are pink just for that reason.
I've got labels on almost everything.
Mm-hmm.
A pack of metallic Sharpies worked wonders. Went around because most things are black. You know, a normal Sharpie's not much use. Ah, see, purple. Mine, I've gone with orange.
Ooh.
Doing that though.
Not sure if I've got. There we go. I would have used the mic stand that the microphone's on, but it's. Yeah,
Ooh, yeah.
everything's got orange tape on, which is good because it's not a very common coloured tape.
Mm-hmm.
The closest thing I do to that is I have a ton of like nerdy pins on my laptop case and my main backpack, just so I can immediately find it and I'd be like, no, because I'm like the only nerd in my local apart from like one other person, so it's like no one else can claim that's theirs. And I'm like, really, you're gonna try and claim? And the same thing with my hard hat. I have a bunch of stickers, you know, the typical sound company ones, but I also have nerdy ones. So it's like, again, and I also get it green. Everyone gets the orange or the red or the white. I'm like, no, I'm getting a green one.
Mine's orange, but that's because of the colour scheme. I've got a whole orange thing going on. In fact, my Pelly case is orange as well.
Yeah, Pelican case is one of those things that it's like it's always been on my list of things to want to get, and I really
Yeah, mine's not
should.
even a real Pelly.
Oh man, I bought mine last year and I love it. I have it filled to the brim with all of my like gig essentials.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I have like behind me you see an office filing. So what's in there is for my backpack, but then
Mhm.
there's different drawers. One has my outdoor gear stuff, so raincoat, bug spray, and then it has another one where it has just the gear for for when I'm doing a band and I need that other one. So I am prepared in that sense.
Mhm.
Travel adapters. If you get any work abroad,
Yeah.
if you hit Europe, make sure you throw a travel adapter in your bag.
Mhm.
If you've got one travel adapter and a short four-way, you're laughing. And it's surprising how many people forget, and then they get there on the first day and the phone's dead.
It's surprising too. Like when I would go to conventions and like hang out with people in like my roommates in the hotel, it's surprising how many would forget to bring just this like a socket adapter, like one, you know, those 1/2 foot long ones. I'm just like, and whenever I bring, they'd be like, oh my God, thank you. And it's like
Mhm.
just the little things that make a big difference. I'm just trying to think of like what anything else that might be useful, of like the typical stuff that like I have beyond like water bottles and stuff like that.
Laser measures are handy.
Huh?
Laser measures can come in handy.
Yeah. And also having, weirdly enough,
Big investment.
having a lighter, even if you don't smoke, having a lighter, because there's always going to be someone on the crew that does. And when you offer the lighter, they'd be like, oh, thanks, man.
That's why I always have a drum key around. You always make friends if you've got the drum key.
Yeah, that drum.
I should probably adopt this attitude of carrying things. It always seems to be drummers Scott, you've just a little bit earlier you mentioned you two are a spare pair of drum kits and some moon gel, and I've heard a lot of other sound engineers talk about how they've got a drum kit or moon gel, and it always seems to be drum based. I'm not sure what it says about how inept drummers are at looking after their own gear, but I've got this deep kind of I don't know. On principle, I kind of refuse to put anything in my bag or case that I feel like someone else should have brought for themselves. But maybe that's just me being mean.
You mean you don't have Charity 9 volts always kicking around? Because I feel like I always have a couple of those.
I can't remember the last time I saw a 9 volt.
Oh, no. I find that like acoustic guitar players, I don't know what it is about Nashville, but nobody brings a 1/4-inch cable and their battery is always dead.
I also,
that's one thing that 9 volts is still active instruments and smoke detectors.
I always carry, I forgot to add, I always carry guitar strings and instrument cable just because somebody forgets it. And like one gig I did, the guy brought his entire rig, but for some reason he'd added one new pedal and he forgot to bring a 1/4-inch. And I was like, here you go, man.
Yep.
So, and it's, I don't know too, it's with drummers. I think it's because they got so many things, and the moon gel's more of an acoustic thing. You technically don't need the moon gel to get through it, but man, it will make the day a whole lot easier. And drumsticks too, is like, especially if they're a touring act, you know, the day before they broke a drumstick and you're in like podunk nowhere where the closest, you know, music store is closed by the time the gig starts. So even if it's not their preferred stick, it's better than nothing. That kid is just literally, it's like, this is enough to get the show going. After a certain point, I'm like, I'm not bringing drum heads. I'm not bringing XYZ because now it's on you. I'm just bringing what's called the disposables.
Yeah. Anything that I wouldn't be absolutely heartbroken if it didn't make its way back to me, you know, purple tape or no.
Yeah. Bag of adapters. There's always some kind of bag of adapters in my case. Jack to XLR, splits, male to male, female to female. Occasionally there'll be a 3-pin to 5-pin just in case my little lighting friend forgets something, but he doesn't. He's got a photographic memory, so he just remembers things that I don't usually. Fuses, 30-amp fuses. A lot of.
What do you use fuses for?
See, I'm not sure how electrical like extension cables work in the States. Is there not a fuse in the plug? Because I know it's so.
There might be, but I don't think I would ever think to do anything with it.
Right. So in the UK, I've never got anything handy. I've got a room full of garbage and none of it's useful. So in the UK, it's a 13-amp plug system, 240 volts. And then across the live, there's a fuse. By law, every electrical appliance that you buy here has to be supplied with the correct rated fuse. So if something draws 4 amps, you know, if it's a 4-amp load, it'll come with the next up rated fuse, so it'll come with a 5-amp fuse. So that's for things like lamps. But yeah, the first place that you're gonna usually have a fault is a blown fuse. It's quite nice when I see it quite a lot with higher gear. You'll go into the back of a desk, and the IEC in the back of the desk, the power cable, will just have a fuse taped to the end next to the plug. So if the fuse does blow, you don't need to go looking for one. It's already there taped to the cable, which is quite handy. But I tend to take like a pack of just a selection. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Other what kind of tools? Are people touring tools? Yeah. What actual tools are you carrying then, Kim?
Let's see. I've got my kit behind me here. I've got multiple crescent wrenches, just in case I need to lend one. Screwdrivers of all kinds. I've got this little case here with like different screwdrivers and Allen wrenches and a sewing kit because somebody's dress is always broken, or you know, have to fix something there. Little scissors for cutting labels or whatever else if you're labeling and you want to make it look neat, or electrical tape and you want to make it look neat. Cable tester is kind of a tool. I mean, yeah, just like wrenches and screwdrivers,
Yeah.
all kinds. Sometimes a drill.
Yeah.
Like if there's a rack that I think I'm gonna have to move stuff around in, a drill makes it way faster.
Yeah, you're not drilling into walls or anything.
No.
No.
Yeah, I just remembered another useful little thing is a power outlet to USB one,
Mhm.
because someone will have and also in turn have the basic ones like the Lightning, USB-C, and 3.0, because someone is bound to be like, oh man, I forgot my charger back at the last city. I forgot the cable, and be like, here you go. Even if it's like the slow one, I always throw it in, just be like, yo, here's at least a charge. And also another thing, I learned this one from DC Sound Off, having one of these. Well, first of all, having these bags from Sound Tools, these things are amazing. I've stuffed the hell out of these, and none of them have broke. And one of these, I can, if by lighting, so
What
they're
is
basically,
that?
Power bank?
yeah, it's a little
Oh,
power
yeah.
bank. And one also has a little flashlight built into it too,
Yeah.
which has
mine
been
does.
useful. But I found what's great about these is because sometimes if you're at an outdoor gig and you've been using your phone all day, it drains. So having that. And what also another neat thing is I power it, so it's a constant power one, and then I already have now 2 to go out USB, because most of them will USB to Thunderbolt, USB to whatever. So having one of those this always exists in. So I either have 1 or 2. This is the smaller one. I always have 1, if not 2, with me. Especially on like long load-ins, just having one of those and just plugging it in, so you always have something going.
Mm-hmm.
Knife and fork.
Yeah, I had one. I had one of those mini folding ones, and I was an idiot one time and was flying somewhere, and TSA took the knife part, and they couldn't split it. But yeah, what do you got there?
I'm also having a heavy one. It's around
Ah,
30,000 milliampere.
Yeah.
30,000.
Yeah, there's even like, ooh, that reminds me.
Of course, I don't know if you can.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I saw someone do a video on, I don't know if it could be that one or where there's ones powerful enough that you can power a little 10-inch self-powered speakers. And I was like, ooh, that'd be really good for like small little like outdoor weddings or stuff. And I'm like, just knowing that technology probably existed, but it wasn't easy to. I remember in like the 90s, like just trying to find a converter to convert what was in your car to what you could use to plug in was like, the things were like the size of a brick and were like $500. And now we can get these, like, even if you buy made in America ones for like $50, $100. And it's just, sometimes it's amazing how much technology has progressed.
Mm-hmm.
I also have a DC power bank, which can, serve the power to the router. Most of the time, I didn't found that much good port in my mixing desk to, put the charging thing over there. So I just plug in with that DC power bank, and it works so well with it.
Which, on an interesting topic about power, is like, how often do people often use that or haven't installed the battery backups on boards? I've yet to have a show where I like having them. That's a sense of safety, but it's like, I always wondered, I'm like, unless the entire building's on a generator, all this is good for is knowing that I can save my show file at the end of the night before it goes. But I'm like, it's one of those weird safety, like, backup things. I'm like, why invest into this if you're not going to, like, one venue I work for, like, literally they have all the soundboards and lighting boards have battery backups. But one time about a couple of months ago, the power went out and there was a generator, but it only powered the basic lights, not even the like stage lights. And I'm like, I talked to the tech director. I'm like, why is there a generator if we then can't power anything else? And it's like, well, they didn't want to invest into it. I'm like, they invested into a generator to power the building. how much more would it cost for a generator to power the actual system?
The venue I was working at had an emergency backup system on their lights, but it was battery based. They had a plant room that was full of I'd be guessing a number, but I'm going to say about 200 what look like car batteries wired in series, which is, you know, it's fine doing that if what you're backing up is a lot of LED emergency exit lights. Not so much if you're trying to power a rig of 72 park cans. But also in that building, what they did have is on their fire alarm system, it would, if the fire alarms went off, it would kill the sound power. With the idea when they were making whatever decisions went through their head was that sound engineers are incapable of noticing that the house lights have come up. There's a flashing red light, and their music's far louder than the sirens. So yeah, they decided that the safest thing to do was to just have it just cut the power dead. So there's been a few people that have come in and they have had them UPSs, the uninterruptible power supplies, and they've been glad of that, because you know the last thing they want is for the halfway through the show for the fire alarms to go off and their show file to just be corrupt because it's been slammed into darkness, especially as the building was a council-owned building, and it was part of a leisure complex where there was, on the opposite side, which was run by a different company, there was a swimming baths and a gym and an ice rink. And the ice rink on the evenings attracted a lot of local kids who would have a tendency to be walking down corridors pushing fire alarm panels. So the amount of false alarms that we had was unbelievable. Yeah, those battery backups were useful for people in those situations. I've never had one myself.
Yeah, they're pretty useful. They just add like one more step to the shutdown process, but knowing they're kind of there is like one of those little tiny comfort things. It's not going to save the show, but it's just like, okay, I got it. And you can then say, it's like, so if like the act goes, hey, why did this go? I'll be like, sorry. But it was interesting, Kim, you kind of talked a little bit earlier, because we went off on a tangent about learning about networking. Like, to use the CLQL series and Rivage, you got to learn Dante, and everyone's always like, yeah, you got to know networking. And I jumped in going, okay, I'll learn it. And I was expecting having to be like, okay, I'm going to have to learn how to network an office building. No, like Yama even has a video where the guy explains, this is what an IP address is. And he's like, it's the equivalent of a home address. That's literally what each number is. And I forget how it broke down, but he basically went, this is the world, this is the country, this is the state, this is the county, this is your street. And when I got that, I was like, oh, because like, I'm sure we've all done audio or controlling IP stuff over internet. And like, I had one issue where I couldn't just get my soundboard to talk to my iPad. And I looked and realized, oh, the IP is nowhere close. It's in the next country. And so when you re-put that number in, it talks. And I was like, oh, and it's like little simple things like that I feel like, oh, just spending 10 minutes on it makes the huge difference.
Yeah, Shure has a really good video on networking too that breaks it down just like you're talking about. That's really cool to check out. They have a lot of really good webinar stuff. Like even before COVID, they were putting out really good content. Their RF coordination stuff is really cool. I've been checking out a lot of those.
Yeah, I've really sort of neglected the webinars lately. I went through a phase where I was making sure I portioned up my day into reading some technical sort of text, whether it was Bob McCarthy's book or something else. Part of the day would be watching some sort of system-based webinar, L-Acoustics or Martin Audio or something. And I had the day sort of nicely split up. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about feeling like you're being productive with your day. I was actually using an app that it's a scheduling app, and it was working really, really well. But then all of a sudden, it stopped giving me alerts. And as soon as it stopped giving me alerts to say like, right now you should be doing whatever the next session was. I just drifted away from it within a day or two, because I've got apparently absolutely no willpower. So yeah, I need to find myself, and if anyone knows of anything other than just entering everything into my iPhone calendar, because I know you can make like separate calendars. You know, if there's any other good sort of scheduling or time, you know, that kind of timetable apps, I'd love to know about them, because I'd love to schedule my day again and try and do something useful.
Sometimes just old, my recommendation, Lee, is just go back to old paper and pen and just write it on the find it on the calendar.
If it doesn't beep at me, I don't take any notice of it.
Well, sometimes, even though it's a little time consuming, putting those in manually, I find, at least for scheduling and stuff like that, helps. Like, especially like when I sign up for those webinar things, like I immediately click the add to Google Calendar, and knowing it's there. And I always set the reminder. I have it set to 2 reminders. I have it set to half an hour before and typically the day before.
Yeah.
I don't listen as much of the day before, but just to put it back in my mind, oh, wait, something's going on tomorrow. But I don't know if anyone experienced this with the webinars. I've had mixed results. Some of them have been absolutely amazing, and others I'm like, I hate to name drop them, but it's the first one I can think of. Sure. And the big corporation that Soundcraft is part of, I've been incredibly disappointed by theirs. Like,
oh, really?
Well, I haven't done all of them, so I don't know. Like, but some of the sure ones, I'm like, ooh, this could be cool. And I'm like, I know everything this one is. And it's like totally not meant for like, it was like, one of them, I forget what it was, but it was like, this topic sounded like something that we all could benefit from. Like, this is literally geared towards a musician. There's like, it was like 0 I could glean from it. And the Soundcraft one, they were doing one on, I'm going to put this because this is my personal, on this, the UI16 it's the only soundboard I actually own. And they were doing one on it. I was like, cool, so much more I could learn about it. And I'm like, I literally know all this. And it wasn't, and I was just like, and to the point where I'd asked them also, and the guy doing it, no offense, he was like, I wasn't expecting him to have like a super, like their version of Campuch, but I was just like, the guy doing it, I'm like, he's like, well, I don't know about this, because he gave so many things that downplay, like, well, I don't know because I don't use it. I'm like, well, could you get someone who at least does other scenarios for it? And I then asked them, because there's a slight rant here. There's an HDMI out on the UI16. Now they have the higher version of it that can do multi-tracking, and apparently it acts as another display. And I'm like, sweet, because the problem with the UI16 is you got to use your computer, iPad, or whatever for it, which is great. But I'm like, man, I'd love to have a dedicated one just to show me what the levels are. And I had asked them, are there any, because if you look on the manual for the UI16, it says HDMI port, plans forthcoming. I'm like, cool, okay, they want to just push the product out. And I straight up asked them, are you ever going to use the HDMI port on the 16? They're like, nope, we have no plans on it. It was only because it was part of the chipset. And I'm like, wow, like way to like squash potential. Like I wasn't expecting it to do everything, but I'm like, just be a display. It's a display port. Just have it output the channel so you can at least have a channel view. But no, and I'm like, all right, Soundcraft, you just lost me as an ever future customer again.
I asked during one of the Digicore Ask Us Anything sessions. Now, usually the ones that they've usually done have been with sound engineers. But one of the sessions they did was with James Gordon, I think the CEO of Digicore. Well, actually, he's the CEO of, I can't remember the name of the company. It's called something weird like Teletonics or something, which is the company that owns, I didn't even know this, is the company that owns Digicore and SSL and a few other things. So it's kind of in the same sort of realms as Harman, that own JBL and AKG and Soundcraft, I think. So there was James Gordon there, and I forget the other guy's name. John Stadius, who's the name they use for the Stadius preamps, the new ones. And he is the head of development, I think, some job title along them sort of lines. And I was asking some questions that were similar to that, Scott. There's things like whether or not they were ever planning on, for the external monitor for the SD9, for example, it's just uses an overview screen, so you can put things like your snapshots window and you can put meter bridges in there, and well, meters in there. And I asked whether or not they were going to ever make it possible to have it as a touch screen, because the SD9 is quite obviously capable of having run touch screens because it's got one. But no, the answer was that that's not on the cards. It's just whatever would be involved in doing it would be even for devices that claim to be plug and play. There would need to be drivers put into the desk that they just don't trust putting in there, and they want as little as possible running on the computer that actually runs the desk. So maybe that was something to do with why Soundcraft haven't added any features to theirs. Maybe they've just started off with good intentions and then decided later down the line that it was actually just going to be more work than it was worth.
Right, and definitely that, but it was, and I could see that, and I understand perfectly. Like when you gave that example, Digico, that makes sense. But it was just the one that they answered it as though of we don't bother, we're not going to care. If they had said, sorry, we don't have the funds and means, I'm like, fine, but they just pass it off, be like, it's not worth it. I'm like, and it's just when as someone who also, on a side note, I also do lighting from time to time. There's so much functions on lighting boards where I'm like, why aren't these functions on our soundboards? The external monitor thing, most soundboards have one monitors unless you're going up to the ST10s, the Rivages. And I'm like, man, if you ever see a picture of my setup, I use the iPad, but I also use my computer. I throw on the offline editor because I like having that much information. And when I saw Yamaha announce their new Rivage line and one of them had 3 screens, I'm like, I want that so badly because there's so much information we always have to deal with. And I'm like, man, having that many screens going on would be amazing.
Sorry, guys, I got to get running. It was so nice to chat with you again. Bye.
Cheers, Kim.
Bye. And I'm actually thinking, I think we've kind of run everything on this topic. Unless there's really someone...
The only other thing I was going to say was to just expand on what you said there about lighting desks, and it was just one very quick point, was obviously with lighting desks, because everything's DMX based, if you've got a moving light that's got, I don't know, 25, 50 channels, you could assign a whole fixture to one fader that's going to control its intensity, and usually when you select it, you have encoder wheels that then turn into different parameters. Or if you wanted, you could assign one DMX channel from that fixture to a fader. You could effectively have one fader that was affecting the pan of a fixture. And I wish this was the kind of thing that was possible within sound desks. I should be able to assign any parameter within a digital console to a fader on the desk. I should be able to assign the the threshold of the compressor on my kick drum to a fader. And I don't know why. I don't think there's any sound desks out there that do that. I'm sure it would involve a lot of processing power, but
yeah, because I know there's some that have it i.e. the CLQL, where you have the touch and turn knob, but you then have to bring it up and tell it that. I think maybe the Rivage does that, but I'm not 100% sure. But it's similar thing with the Midas Pro series, it has user-defined knobs and buttons, and I'm like, sweet, but it's a limited one, and you can't assign MIDI to it. And I'm like, that's the dumbest thing. That it's and the only way you can send MIDI out of a Pro series is you have to assign a sub scene to it. I'm like, that is the stupidest way to go about it.
Yeah. It's like the video that I posted on Goes to 11 recently about finding a method of firing macros on the SD9 other than the 8 assignable macro keys, because you can assign them to fader up, fader down, and the mute buttons, but it's rare that you would have a macro. You don't want to assign a macro to a mute button of a fader that's actually already doing something, because then to fire that macro, you would have to mute and unmute the channel. So I set about trying to find a workaround for that, because you can't assign macros to a fader that hasn't already had something assigned to it, which is stupid, because you can end up with, if you move things around on your desk, you can end up with blank unused faders. You should then be able to assign a macro to that fader and not have a channel or a group of channels running through it. And I said a minute ago that I don't know why Sounddesks haven't done the parameters on faders.
Yeah.
And I said it'll probably take a lot of processing power, but I don't think it would, thinking about it, because you're not doing any extra processing. All you're doing is handing off the control to somewhere else.
Right, because it's like, if it's within, like, let's say, take even perfect example is like, let's say you have a bank of 24 channels and you're only using 12.
Yeah.
The board has been rated to take that 24 processing. So you're not adding processing. You're just like, it's like on, again, like the Midas Pro series, it's like you can choose you can either have this many EQs or this many effects units. I feel soundboards could do the same. It's like, okay, you're only doing a show with 24 inputs and you got 72 channels. You could use those extra like 50 channels or so to do other things. And it's like the faders are already like, flip-on fader is a perfect example of like, it's controlling a fader, a parameter that isn't volume. Well, it is, but it's not controlling the main volume. So I'm like, it exists. It would just be the coding. And it'd be fascinating if, like, video games do this where they put out betas of one saying, hey, this is not the released version. Be interesting if, like, all the soundboard manufacturers be like, hey, here's a beta. If it fails on you, not our problem. You accepted the risk. But it'd be like, that'd be really cool if, like, insert manufacturer would be like, all right, here's the beta version. It may not be the public release, but here's a beta. Give it a try.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really good example you brought up there, Scott, was the idea of doing sends on faders. If I hit a solo button for a monitor mix, for instance, it will open up all of the sends onto faders. So at that point, those faders are doing exactly what I've just said there, but they're controlling the sends, the aux sends from those channels instead of its main volume. So it's taking control from one place, which would usually be a pot, and moving it to a fader. There's not actually any more processing happening. It's just that the control for that processing is just being moved to a different part of the desk. So, no idea.
Yeah, I think also the challenge we find there is I know someone who has a great saying, the designer is not the user. And it's like, every company is guilty of this, where they make these soundboards and they think, and they say, we've gotten feedback from all insert big sound engineer. I'm like, yeah, that's great that you got feedback, but I'm like, I forget somewhere I mentioned, it's like, before any soundboard should get released, they should be like, all right, this needs to go on an actual tour and be like, before it gets public. And I'd be like, wouldn't that be great if, like, we could do that, where it's like, here's a beta version of the software, run it on tour, see what happens, and get back to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if even if it wasn't in the tour, if someone said, right, we want volunteers to come and spend a week in our facility mixing some multi-tracks, see if you can break it.
Yeah, because
I'd be up for that.
Same here.
With a new console, I'd go and stay in a hotel for a week and throw faders during the day.
Or even just straight up firmware too, because, like, to me, that's where I feel so much potential could be done, is just in the firmware of, like, could be done. And but I think it's now, Liam, turned into you and me just talk show. So
just
Gregor
having a rant about console manufacturers.
But I think that's that interesting thing of, like, just to kind of end on that note, is maybe of, like, talk to those, manufacturers, be like, yo, we've got nothing but time here. Do you have these things you would like to experiment with on?
Yeah. One thing I will say good about Digico, though, is their technical, like, customer services department, their help department is really good. I don't think I've ever sent them an email that they haven't got back to me with an answer for. I did go through a spate of sending email as soon as just after I'd bought the desk. I sent about 10 in a week, and they suggested that I go to one of the seminars.
I just had an interesting thought. You and I both use Reaper. Reaper's a very open source, you gotta pay for it, but it's a pretty open source mixing DAW. What if like they released it saying like, yo, you can't resell this, but here's the source code to, you know, the Digico SD9, have at it. And you could be like, on a forum, they could be like, hey, here is my modded version of the firmware. You know, you have to sign all the, yeah, or just be like, or just so like someone like wanted to do that, like I want to control, you know, kick drum attack with a fader and, you know, enable that. I doubt any of these companies, because they'd be immediately scared, like, oh no, it's like, no, you have to invest $10,000 to $50,000. Putting out your firmware is not going to lose you any money. I think, in fact, it would gain you money because people be like, oh, I could.
It's whether or not they'd have a technical help department that could put up with the influx of calls after that, because you know people are just going to destroy their own consoles. And then
right, and I think it would have to be the equivalent with like with video games too. It's like if you go to any modding website, they have this disclosure saying, right, I think even video games, with the exception of a few, they say if you mod this, you void your warranty.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of on a strange note to just end this call, because Greg and I would like to thank you for attending these and tell anyone you might know who is interested in these. So once again, thank you for your time. And I end. Yep, thank you. And the recording stops now.
Thank you.